We just saw history. This fight will go down as the most dominant performance of all time in UFC history.
There. But all these guys should be running to the wrestling room right now, getting with a coach that can prepare them for the wrestling exchanges. I don't know if one training camp is going to be enough to help you close the gap, because Chimaev is so good in those areas.
Fellas, listen closely, because I'm about to say something bold. Khamzat Chimaev is not just another fighter in the UFC. He's a once-in-a-generation force who might genuinely go his entire career without tasting defeat. And if you think that's an exaggeration, stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why so many believe he's unstoppable. And hey, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because we break down MMA like nobody else, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Stick with me till the end, because this story is about dominance, controversy, and the possibility of seeing history unfold before our eyes.
Now, let's rewind for a moment. If you look at Khamzat's career from the beginning, his rise wasn't just fast, it was explosive. On the regional circuit, he was running through opponents like they were training dummies, and when he entered the UFC, he carried that exact same energy. His early fights looked like mismatches. He'd walk into the octagon, lift his opponents off their feet like they were children, slam them to the mat, and maul them until they broke. That's the type of start that makes casual fans sit up and hardcore analysts shake their heads in disbelief. But what really made Khamzat special wasn't just the domination, it was the aura. Fighters knew what he was going to do. Everyone could see the game plan from a mile away. Shoot, slam, smash, and yet nobody could stop it. That's a terrifying quality, the kind that only a handful of fighters in UFC history have possessed. Think about guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov or prime Georges St-Pierre when he leaned on wrestling. When you know what's coming and still can't stop it, that's a whole different level of greatness. Of course, hype only gets you so far. The turning point came when Khamzat faced Gilbert Burns. Up until then, he looked untouchable, but Burns wasn't some random contender. He was a top-ranked fighter, an elite grappler, and a dangerous striker. That fight pushed Khamzat into deep waters for the first time. For 3 rounds, the two of them went back and forth in one of the wildest firefights we'd seen that year. Some fans even scored it for Burns, calling it a robbery. But at the end of the day, Khamzat's hand was raised. And that told us 2 things. 1, he wasn't invincible, but 2, he was still capable of digging deep and finding a way to win against world-class opposition. That's the kind of test every future champion needs. After Burns, he reminded everyone who he was by absolutely dismantling Kevin Holland in under 2 minutes. He shot in, dragged Holland down, and locked up a submission before Holland even had time to sweat. That fight was almost comical in how easy it looked, like Khamzat was sparring a teammate, not facing a legit UFC veteran. It was the perfect bounce-back performance, silencing critics who thought Burns had exposed him. Then came the Usman fight. Now, this is where things got complicated. Stepping in on short notice, Khamzat faced one of the most dominant welterweights of all time, a former champion with ironclad takedown defense. And for the first round, Khamzat looked like a monster. He ragdolled Usman, almost locked up a finish, and showed that he could handle an all-time great. But as the fight wore on, his gas tank started to fade. That's the first time we really saw a chink in the armor. Khamzat slowing down, losing that relentless pressure, and giving his opponent openings. It was a razor-close decision, and while Khamzat got the win, the doubts about his cardio grew louder. But here's the thing. Even with that flaw, he still beat Kamaru Usman. That says a lot. Think about it. Most fighters would crumble the moment their biggest weapon doesn't work. But Khamzat still managed to adapt enough to edge it out. And this wasn't some washed-up version of Usman. Even on short notice, Usman is a nightmare matchup for anyone, and Khamzat survived him. After that, though, something changed in Khamzat. Gone was the cocky, wild fighter who used to hang out with Darren Till and scream in press conferences. What we saw instead was a calmer, colder version of him. A man who had faced adversity, survived it, and come out sharper. That new mentality showed itself during the build-up to his fight with Robert Whittaker. Now, let's pause here, because Robert Whittaker isn't just some name on a resume. He's a former champion, one of the best middleweights of all time, and a guy who had just put together a strong winning streak. Many thought Whittaker would have the tools to shut Khamzat down. His footwork, his striking, his ability to keep fights standing. But when they finally met, Khamzat wasted no time. He shot in, dragged Whittaker down, and controlled him like it was nothing. Within minutes, he cranked on a submission that forced Whittaker into a brutal position. His teeth were literally shifted out of place. That wasn't just a win, that was a statement. And with that victory, Khamzat's hype was reborn. People who had written him off after the Usman fight suddenly realized this guy is still terrifying. But the biggest test was yet to come. Dricus du Plessis, the reigning middleweight champion, undefeated in the UFC, and looking like the man destined to hold the belt for years. Many believed he'd be too strong, too awkward, too resilient for Khamzat. And yet, what happened? Over 25 minutes, Khamzat systematically broke him down. He didn't necessarily deliver massive damage, but he did what great wrestlers do best. He neutralized everything. He took du Plessis out of his rhythm, dragged him down, smothered him, and racked up one of the most dominant scorecards you'll ever see in a title fight. A 50-44 against a sitting champion. That's not just impressive, that's historic. And here's where we are now. Khamzat Chimaev, undefeated, UFC middleweight champion, carrying an aura of inevitability. Critics will point to his cardio issues. Others will say his striking is underdeveloped. But here's my question to you. If the best middleweights in the world can't stop him, even when they know exactly what's coming, then who can? Stick around, because in the next part, we're going to break down the contenders one by one. Who actually has the tools to give Khamzat trouble? And is there truly anyone in this division who can take that belt away from him? Make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss it. All right, so now that we've set the stage, Khamzat Chimaev as the reigning undefeated middleweight champion, the next logical question is simple. Who's left? Who in this division actually has the tools to beat him? Because if we're honest, right now, it feels like the middleweight landscape is full of names that look dangerous on paper. But once you put them in front of Khamzat, they crumble like the rest. Let's start with Nassourdine Imavov. Now, Imavov is a striker through and through. Crisp boxing, solid combinations, and honestly one of the smoothest operators in the division when it comes to staying at range. He's been taking out opponents with precision, and compared to Khamzat, his striking is definitely sharper. That's his selling point. If he keeps it standing, he could light Khamzat up. But here's the problem. Keeping it standing against Chimaev is a nightmare. We've seen Imavov get out-muscled before. Brendan Allen mauled him on the ground. Jared Cannonier put him on his back. Even Adesanya, who's not known for his grappling, was able to trip him and control him in moments. If those guys can drag him down, what do you think Khamzat's going to do? He's not just going to trip him, he's going to pick him up, dump him, and smother him until the fight is over. That's why, even though Imavov looks like a slick test, he probably ends up like Robert Whittaker, pinned, pressured, and eventually forced to tap. Then there's Caio Borralho. Now, this guy is interesting because he's one of the most well-rounded fighters in the top 10. He's got clean striking, dangerous kicks, solid jiu-jitsu, and underrated wrestling. In a lot of ways, he's like a younger version of a prime middleweight, able to do a bit of everything at a high level. On paper, this is the type of fighter who should give Khamzat problems, because Khamzat thrives when opponents are one-dimensional. If you're only a striker, he'll wrestle you. If you're only a grappler, he'll smash you on the feet. Borralho, though, has answers in multiple areas. But here's where I get skeptical. Even the most well-rounded fighters struggle when they face someone who's truly elite in one department. And Khamzat's wrestling isn't just good. It's smothering, suffocating, overwhelming. We've even seen training footage where Borralho looked outgunned against Khamzat in sparring. So yeah, Borralho's dangerous everywhere. But when Khamzat gets his hands locked, I think that fight still goes the same way. Takedown, top control, and another name on the undefeated record. Now, let's talk about Anthony Hernandez. Honestly, if there's one guy who might be Khamzat's toughest test, it's this man. Hernandez is a grinder, and I mean that in the best way. He's got a gas tank that doesn't quit. He chains takedowns together like a younger Cain Velasquez, and once he gets on top, he smashes people with pressure and volume. The dude is relentless. He doesn't give opponents a second to breathe. And the cardio advantage he has might be the exact weapon you need against Khamzat. Because let's be real, the only time Khamzat has looked human was when he started to fade against Usman. If Hernandez can survive the early storm, drag Khamzat into the later rounds and push a pace, things could get very, very interesting. But again, we have to ask, can he survive that storm? Because Khamzat isn't the type of guy who gives you time to settle in. He blitzes from the opening bell. And Hernandez, while tough as nails, has had moments where he's been clipped, dropped, or controlled early. Against Khamzat, those slip-ups might be fight-ending. Still, if anyone in the division has the gas tank and the grappling pedigree to make it ugly, it's Hernandez. Moving on, Roman Dolidze. This guy is a nightmare in scrambles, with top-tier jiu-jitsu and a clinch game that can frustrate opponents. He thrives in those weird, chaotic exchanges where fights get messy. And yeah, stylistically, that's a wrinkle Khamzat hasn't faced much. Someone who's actually dangerous off their back. But let's be honest, Dolidze has also been out-wrestled before. Gerald Meerschaert, who Khamzat obliterated in seconds, was able to put Dolidze in bad positions. Bo Nickel, another young grappler, handled him without too much trouble. So while the jiu-jitsu threat is real, it feels unlikely he'll be able to catch Khamzat in a submission when Khamzat's top control is this smothering. And what about Paulo Costa, a name fans always bring up? Big, strong, aggressive, and with knockout power. On paper, he's a scary matchup. But the reality is, Costa is one of the most inconsistent fighters in the UFC. Some nights, he looks like a killer. Other nights, he looks lost. And when you've been out-grappled by guys like Marvin Vettori, what do you think happens when Khamzat gets his hands on you? I don't care how big Costa is. If Khamzat drags him down, the fight won't last long. Then we have Michael Venom Page, who just made his UFC debut. Let's be honest here. MVP is flashy, he's awkward, he's fun to watch. But as a stylistic matchup, this is the easiest fight Khamzat could ever ask for. MVP's entire career has shown one glaring weakness: wrestling. You put him against a high-level grappler, and he folds. Now imagine putting him against the best wrestler in the UFC's middleweight division. That fight would look like a mismatch from the opening bell. Khamzat would shoot, land a takedown, and probably finish him in under a minute. The reality is this: every single one of these guys has strengths. Imavov has striking. Borralho has well-rounded skills. Hernandez has cardio. Dolidze has jiu-jitsu. Costa has power. MVP has flash. But none of them, not one, has the complete package needed to beat Khamzat. And that's why he feels so unbeatable right now. Because to dethrone a guy like Khamzat, you can't just be good at one thing. You need to be able to stuff takedowns, survive the ground, keep the fight standing, land damage, and do it all with championship-level cardio. That fighter doesn't exist in this division, not yet. And that's the scary part. Because if Khamzat cleans out the middleweight contenders the way it looks like he's about to, the conversation shifts from who's next to can he become the greatest of all time? Stick with me, because in part 3, we're going to zoom out. We're talking about legacy, comparisons to Khabib, how Khamzat stacks up against the greatest wrestlers in UFC history, and whether he can retire undefeated. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let's keep going. So here's the big question. If nobody in the current middleweight division looks capable of stopping Khamzat Chimaev, where does that leave him? What does this mean for his legacy? And could we really be looking at another Khabib-like figure? An undefeated monster who walks away from the sport without ever being beaten. Let's break this down. First, the comparisons to Khabib Nurmagomedov are obvious. Both men rely on overwhelming wrestling. Both have that aura of inevitability. You know exactly what they're going to do, and yet you can't stop it. Khabib's opponents spent entire training camps preparing to defend the takedown, and they still found themselves flat on their backs, eating punches until they broke. Khamzat has that same energy. The double leg, the chain wrestling, the suffocating top pressure. It's déjà vu for anyone who watched Khabib's reign. But there are also key differences. Khabib fought at lightweight, a division stacked with elite wrestlers and dangerous strikers. Every fight was against someone who posed a legitimate threat. Khamzat, on the other hand, fights at middleweight, a division historically dominated by strikers and only a handful of truly elite grapplers. That means his skill set, particularly his wrestling, is even more overwhelming here than Khabib's was at lightweight. In other words, Khamzat doesn't just have the skills, he has the perfect division to showcase them. Now, is he flawless? No. And we need to be honest about that. We've seen him slow down in fights that go past the first round. We've seen him get clipped on the feet, and we know his striking isn't on the same level as guys like Adesanya or even Imavov. If there's a path to beating Khamzat, it's simple. Survive the first storm, force him into later rounds, and turn it into a cardio war. That's exactly what Usman nearly did. And that's why fighters like Anthony Hernandez, with endless gas tanks, at least have a sliver of hope. But here's where reality kicks in. Hope doesn't win fights. Skills win fights. And the gap between Khamzat's wrestling and the rest of the division is so massive that even his flaws don't look fatal. You can point to cardio, you can point to striking, but none of that matters if you can't even stay on your feet long enough to exploit it. And so far, nobody has proven they can. Let's talk about greatness. If Khamzat defends his middleweight belt 2 or 3 times, beating the likes of Hernandez, Borralho, or Imavov, his resume will be undeniable, Add that to wins over Whittaker, du Plessis, Usman, and Burns, and we're talking about one of the most stacked undefeated records in UFC history. At that point, the GOAT conversations will start. Is he the best wrestler ever in the UFC? Does he surpass Khabib? Could he even challenge for double champ status at light heavyweight? These aren't fantasy questions anymore. They're realistic possibilities. Of course, the UFC is unpredictable. Injuries, bad weight cuts, stylistic surprises. These things can derail even the greatest careers. That's why we have to temper expectations. But if Khamzat stays healthy and continues to evolve, he has everything it takes to dominate until the day he chooses to walk away. And that brings us to my concrete opinion. After watching his rise, analyzing his fights, and breaking down every contender in the division, here's what I believe. Khamzat Chimaev is unbeatable at middleweight right now. Period. That doesn't mean he'll never have close fights. That doesn't mean he won't get rocked or cut or even pushed to the brink. But I don't see a single fighter in this division with the complete package to actually beat him. His wrestling is too overwhelming, his strength too dominant, and his mentality too relentless. Unless the UFC brings in a generational talent with world-class takedown defense and 5-round cardio, Khamzat is going to run through this division the same way Khabib ran through lightweight. Now, will he retire undefeated? That depends on how long he fights. The longer you stay in this game, the more likely you are to slip. All it takes is one mistake, one punch, one bad night. But if Khamzat plays it smart, racks up a few title defenses, and then walks away at the top, yeah, he could absolutely retire undefeated. And if that happens, we won't just be talking about Khamzat Chimaev, the champion. We'll be talking about Khamzat Chimaev, the legend. So I'll leave you with this. Every once in a while, a fighter comes along who doesn't just win, but changes the way we think about the sport. Khabib was one. Anderson Silva was one. Georges St-Pierre was one. And right now, it feels like Khamzat Chimaev might be next. Love him or hate him, you're watching history in real time. Now it's your turn. Do you think Khamzat will retire undefeated? Or do you believe someone in this division has the skills to finally expose him? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's get this debate going. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what's coming next.